Welcome back to Wine and the Word. I hope you have gotten somewhere cozy with a group of friends or people that you're just getting to know or people that you've known a long time around a beverage, a favorite cup of tea or coffee, or a glass of beer or wine. But most of all, I hope you're having some good time to check in and see how one another are doing. I'm Pastor Matthew, and it's good to be with you again. This time with Wine and the Word, we're going to be talking about stories. The stories that surround us in our world, in our lives, and even in the ancient stories of our scriptures. We just hosted a conference at St. Andrew through our new ministry called Church Anew. It was entitled Telling the Old Story in New Ways. And we heard from an amazing storyteller named Marlon Hall. He invited us to reflect on our own stories as source material for making sense of the world. He invited us to think about the stories we tell about ourselves. What do those stories look like? What do they feel like? Are they positive, uplifting, encouraging stories, or are they self-fulfilling prophecies? Are they negative stories that beat us up about little things that we've done wrong, stuff that's hanging in our past, stuff that we've wondered or hoped to do but can't quite get around to? We tell all sorts of stories about ourselves. We tell stories about the work that we do. We tell stories about our callings, our vocations, the people that we are, the relationships that we hold. We tell all sorts of stories about ourselves. But what I want to wonder about, and this is with Marlon Hall's invitation, I want to wonder about who we are at our core. So I want you to imagine something. Imagine that you went to a dinner party with one single rule. And the only rule is that you can't talk about what you do for a living. You can't talk about your vocation. You can only talk about who you are. So imagine you're going to this dinner party. It's an elaborate dinner party with beautiful food set out in front of you. And you can't talk about what you do for a living. It would change things, wouldn't it? Whether you are a caretaker of young children at your home, or whether you work in a high-rise downtown, at a school or a hospital, or even like me, a church, much of the stories that we tell and that fill our daily lives have to do with those callings. But the story that we tell about who we are is much deeper. So I think it's important to think about that and to tell better stories about ourselves. Marlon Hall sets these dinner tables. He calls them salon dinner parties, where people are invited around a table. And in fact, he built this table with some sculptor friends from some reclaimed wood of his grandmother's house in Louisiana. The house was torn down, but they used the wood from the home to build this table in Marlon's living space. And so he invites people, curated people who have different perspectives and different ideas on the world, and he gives them that single rule. You cannot talk about what you do. You can only talk about who you are. And at this conference that we just hosted at St. Andrew, he gave people a simple prompt. And the invitation was to write a poem, a 4-word why. A poem about who we are at our very core. So I'm going to give you instructions on how to write this poem. So take a couple minutes, take a deep breath, think about who you are at your core, who God created you to be. Not the things that you do or the stuff that fills your daily life, but who are you? I want to invite you to write a 4-word poem. It starts with a verb. All right? And a verb, remember, is an action word, something that does. So I'm going to read you an example of create vitality out of loss. So it starts with a verb. The second word is a noun. Remember, it's a thing, something. And then the third word is a preposition. And then the fourth word is another noun. So you have a verb, a noun, a preposition, and a noun. So create vitality from loss. A 4-word poem. That's one example, but I want you to think about your own. What's your calling? What's your essence? And who are you at your very core? The stories that we tell ourselves matter. The stories that we see in the world matter. The stories that we consume matter. The stories of the Bible matter. In fact, at the very beginning of the Bible is this beautiful poem. It's a little more than 4 words, yes, but it's a poem about how God creates out of speaking. God creates actually out of telling a story about creation. And the story that is told about creation is 3 simple words. It is good. See, the story of creation tells all of the actions. In the beginning, God created light out of darkness. God formed human beings from the dust of the clay. God invited the creation itself to sprout forth new life. God separated waters from land and let the land grow up from the waters. But after every single day of creation, God gives that story about creation. It is good. We don't tell that story about ourselves enough. It is good. You are good. We don't tell that story about our world enough. We are good. This place is good. So in your time together, I hope that you'll share some stories. They could be stories of hope. They could be stories of promise. They could be stories of sorrow. But get cozy with one another. Get real. Show up and be here right now. Another thing that Marlon invited us into is to center ourselves around our breathing. To breathe in and out. To breathe in through our nose and sigh out through our mouth. To let those thoughts wander away. The thoughts that are keeping you away from this present moment. And to be right here, right now. We encounter stories all over our daily lives. Whether it's with the people that we know and we know those stories so well. The stories of our past, the stories of our family, our greatest joys, our greatest triumphs, and our greatest sorrows. We know those stories like the back of our hand, but I want you also to imagine the stories that we encounter in places that we least expect them. The grocery store, waiting in line at the DMV, waiting in traffic on 494. Think about the stories that are in each and every one of the people that we encounter, stories that we can never imagine, stories that we'll never hear, but we collide with them on a daily basis. I want to end with an invitation into those stories. And it's from a friend of mine, Meta Herrick Carlson, who just wrote a book called Ordinary Blessings, Prayers, Poems, and Meditations for Everyday Life. It's a beautiful little book that is going to wind up on my car dashboard. That's where I intend it to show up in my life, because these little poems are meant to disrupt my daily life with some spirituality. She wrote a poem, or a blessing, I should say, a blessing for waiting in public, and I'd like to read it for us. For Waiting in Public by Meta Herrick Carlson. Before you disappear into yourself, let your heart wander this mundane creation. Notice this space and bless the ones who care for it. Notice the sounds and bless the ones who make them. Be present until you sense tenderness that surrounds you. There are stories and dreams and fears in this place, though you might never know their details. Wonder with them and offer yourself to their mystery. May you encounter stories of wonder. May you encounter stories of curiosity. May you encounter stories of resilience and promise and hope. Whether they be stories that you tell yourself or that you tell about this broken world, may they be stories that remind you that God's intention is that it is good, that you are good, that we are good. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next month.